They woke the next morning to a sea of low-lying mist that drifted around Bitterbridge's walls. The previous evening's orange-streaked sky had dissolved into a pale wash of dawn, with the sun struggling to break through a shroud of cloud. Margeary stood at the parapet where she and Jon had shared that quiet moment, gazing over tents and banners, the shapes blurred into ghostly silhouettes by the morning haze. She reflected on how much had changed, how war, once a distant threat, now shaped their every waking thought. Yet she found calm in these hushed minutes, holding to the hope that unity, rather than ceaseless bloodshed, would claim the final victory. Jon soon joined her, his footfalls muffled on the dew-slick stone. Ghost prowled behind him, ever watchful. Their gazes met in a gentle exchange of relief. They had survived the battle, repulsed the Lannisters for now, and staved off a deeper invasion into the Reach. Despite the carnage witnessed, their alliance stood strong. For Jon, the memory of his father's fate in King's Landing still stung like an unhealed wound. Yet he sought to honor Ned Stark's memory by protecting the Orchard lands and those who toiled among them. Margeary, in turn, thought of her grandmother's unwavering counsel and her father's efforts to keep the region's morale from collapsing. They were all bound together in a precarious unity. Starks, Tyrells, their bannermen, and the small folk who followed because they had nowhere else to go. Catelyn Stark soon appeared on the walkway, offering them each a faint smile of greeting. The chill in the air made her wrap her cloak more tightly, but her bearing was resolute. She gestured for them to come down to the yard, where messages from the riverlands had arrived in the late hours. Together, they walked the steps that led inside Bitterbridge's fortress keep, passing armed guards who saluted out of mixed respect for Margaery's Tyrell lineage and Jon's reputation as a northern warrior. In the keep's antechamber, the scattered parchment laid upon a rough-hewn table seemed to carry the fate of half the realm within its folds. One letter bore King Robb's seal, the wax imprinted with the direwolf. Jon lifted it with careful hands, his pulse quickening at the possibility of urgent news. Margeary stood close, curiosity alight in her eyes. The letter was succinct. Tywin Lannister's forces near Harrenhal had pulled back from direct confrontation with the north but still menaced the riverlands, ready to pounce if Robb's army showed any weakness. Meanwhile, the Crown in King's Landing had issued a furious decree naming House Tyrell traitors. Any house that aided the Rose and the Wolf would be branded an enemy of the Iron Throne. The letter concluded with Robb advising vigilance, cautioning that the Lannisters might attempt subterfuge or sabotage if open battle proved unfavorable. Margeary exhaled as Jon read the words aloud. The tension in the antechamber thickened, reflected in the worried looks of the Northern and Reach knights who lingered within earshot. Catelyn pressed her lips into a thin line. "It sounds as though King's Landing attempts to isolate us politically," she observed. "They want to frighten smaller lords into submission. But if we hold strong, if we show that the alliance can protect its supporters, that fear may dwindle." "How do we keep smaller houses from wavering?" Margeary murmured, glancing at Jon. "Many have pledged their swords under House Tyrell's banner, but if the Crown publicly names them traitors, they might seek an exit if they sense we could fail." Jon grimaced, recalling how quickly allegiances had shifted in the war's early days. "We must demonstrate that the Tyrell-Stark alliance isn't faltering. The recent victory on the battlefield will help. We've proven the Lannisters can be driven back. But we need more than martial might. We should provide security for caravans, ensure farmland remains safe, show that we defend them better than the Crown ever would." Catelyn agreed, adding that word had to be spread across the Reach and into the Riverlands. Stories of how the Orchard lands were spared from a full Lannister incursion, how the Alliance had kept families from ruin. Margeary realized that part of their challenge was not only to fight battles with steel, but to win hearts, ensuring the realm's frightened inhabitants saw promise in their cause. She, personally, felt the weight of that duty. She was the daughter of House Tyrell, the new partner to a bastard-turned-ally of the North, and her name carried a certain mystique in the South. Perhaps that status could be wielded to steady trembling loyalties. They spoke further over a quick breakfast of crusty bread and dried fruit, each bite a reminder of the meager rations that war times afforded. Outside, the day brightened, burning off some of the morning mist. Margeary felt a stirring of restlessness. She knew her father would soon call another war council. Mace Tyrell had been buoyed by the victory but was still uneasy about the possibility of a renewed Lannister push if King's Landing redirected more troops south. The blockade on the Mander continued to starve the capital of goods, further escalating tensions. The realm, already bruised, risked fracturing beyond repair should any new cataclysm strike. When the War Council assembled in the fortress's Great Hall, the atmosphere was strained. Lord Tarly sat with an expression of dour concentration. Lord Mullendore, slender and pensive, stood at a map pinned to a wooden frame. Catelyn and Jon took seats near the head of the long table. Margeary joined them, while Mace Tyrell strode in at last, adjusting the gold-trimmed cloak that signaled his station. The conversation opened with Tarly's report on current scout findings. No sign of immediate Lannister mobilization, but rumors suggested that certain Stormland lords might be wavering, uncertain whether to join Stannis, the Tyrells, or remain neutral. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon apparently consolidated forces at Dragonstone, but his next move was unclear. "It's a precarious balance," Tarly said, arms folded. "With the Lannisters battered here, they may pull more men from other fronts. If so, Tywin might risk leaving Harrenhal vulnerable to King Robb, or even risking King's Landing to Stannis. Each day we hold the blockade, we add pressure. But each day also increases the chance they'll lash out in desperation." Mace Tyrell rubbed his brow. "We must keep the Orchard lands intact. That was the entire impetus for this alliance, to protect Highgarden's domain and punish the Lannisters for their tyranny. But we also can't simply stand idle if an opportunity arises to end the war by seizing the capital. If King's Landing falls, Joffrey's hold collapses." Catelyn interjected. "Seizing King's Landing would require a massive push. The city's walls are strong, and the Lannisters will defend it fiercely. A siege could drag on, causing more suffering. And the moment we commit, Tywin might strike from behind. My son remains in the Riverlands, trying to contain Tywin's forces. If we advanced on the capital, we'd need perfect coordination." Jon studied the table's map, where lines drawn in charcoal indicated the major thoroughfares. "We can't make that move alone. We'd need to be sure Robb can pin Tywin. Or if Stannis makes a move, we coordinate so the Lannisters fight on 2, possibly 3 fronts at once. But trusting Stannis is no simple matter. He claims the Iron Throne by his rights, not by alliances. House Tyrell once nearly sided with Renly, but Renly is dead. Rumor says Stannis used dark magic. It's complicated." Margaery's heart twinged at the memory of Renly's abrupt demise and the swirl of rumors about shadows. "Stannis's methods might be as ruthless as the Lannisters, though for different reasons," she said carefully. "My grandmother never trusted him. I doubt he'd welcome sharing power with the North or the Reach. We'd have to weigh the cost." Mace Tyrell inhaled sharply, frustration coloring his features. "Then for the present we hold our ground. We keep the blockade, guard the orchard and farmland, and wait for either Tywin or Joffrey to flinch. If we can continue to starve the city, perhaps the small folk there will turn on the crown, as rumor suggests. That might give us an advantage." Tarly nodded in agreement. "We can fortify more. We can also spread word among the smaller houses that the Lannisters were repelled at Bitterbridge. Let them see the orchard thrives. The roads are ours. Fear is a powerful persuader, but so is confidence in a strong defense." The War Council concluded with a consensus. Maintain readiness, avoid reckless offensives, and steadily tighten the blockade. Margeary felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that no immediate, massive assault on the city was planned. She hated the thought of fresh slaughter. Anxiety that the conflict might stretch out indefinitely, each day bringing new twists. She clung to Jon's presence as a steady factor, though she knew his duties would again lead him to reconnaissance or training missions. With each week of war, their vow faced fresh trials. After the council, Margeary ventured beyond the fortress walls into the sprawling encampment. She wanted to see conditions for herself, to speak with soldiers and small folk who had been displaced by the fighting. She wore a cloak that bore both a subtle rose emblem and a small direwolf sigil stitched at the hem. Her own touch, reminding all that the alliance between House Tyrell and House Stark was no passing whim. The midday sun beat down on the canvas tents, forging a stifling heat that mingled with the reek of sweat, horses, and cooking fires. She passed groups of children playing near a shallow stream, their mothers eyeing her with curiosity. One older woman approached, clasping Margaery's hand. "My lady, you have my gratitude," the woman said. "Your father's men keep the bandits away, and we have bread. We fled from a hamlet burned by Lannisters a fortnight past. If not for House Tyrell, I don't know where we'd be." Margaery's eyes softened. "We do what we can. I'm sorry for what you've lost. This war spares no one. But if you or your family need anything, seek me or my stewards. You have my word." The woman dipped a curtsy, tears in her eyes. Scenes like this repeated as Margaery moved through the camp. She offered kind words, listened to grievances about ration shortages, and took mental notes of which areas needed better sanitation or safer water. She recognized that even if the orchard had been spared major devastation, war's effect radiated outward, uprooting entire communities. Each time she heard a child's cry or an old man's weary sigh, she vowed anew that she would not let cynicism corrode her empathy. Toward the edge of the camp, she found Catelyn Stark engaged in conversation with a pair of northern soldiers. They stood near a battered wagon loaded with supplies from the riverlands. Margaery joined them, inclining her head in greeting. Catelyn explained that these men had recently arrived with messages. A minor skirmish in the riverlands had ended with Robb's forces victorious, capturing a small group of Lannister outriders. The men also brought some letters. One was addressed to Jon, the other to Margaery herself. They bore a neutral seal she did not recognize. Puzzled, she broke the seal of her letter in a quiet moment, stepping aside from the soldiers. The parchment contained a brief message. "Lady Margaery Tyrell, word travels of your orchard's alliance with the North and your success at Bitterbridge. I represent a circle of individuals in King's Landing who share a distaste for the Lannisters' brutal rule. We labor quietly to protect innocence and subvert tyranny where possible. The blockade strains the city, and unrest grows daily. We implore you, maintain your stance. If the crown falters, we may open a path to free certain captives and destabilize the regime from within. In due time, more may be revealed. Stand firm. A friend in the shadows." Margaery's heart quickened. A secret contact within King's Landing, encouraging the blockade, hinting at rescuing prisoners. Could it be that Sansa Stark or others might be freed if chaos grew in the capital? The letter bore no signature beyond that cryptic line. She wondered if it might be the same network that had once helped Jon escape. So they remained active. A swirl of hope and unease gripped her. Hope that their cause had allies even in the city. Unease that clandestine efforts might provoke savage reprisals. She moved to find Jon, longing to share this revelation. He had been drilling a squad of archers behind the fortress but was returning to the main yard. She practically hurried toward him, the letter folded carefully in her cloak. As soon as they stood face to face, her chest still heaving slightly from the swift walk, she handed him the note. He scanned it, brow furrowing. "A friend in the shadows," he muttered. "They might be the same group who helped me flee the Red Keep. I recall whispers of hidden networks opposed to the Lannisters." Margaery exhaled. "It means we're not alone. If they can help rescue captives or sow dissent, that might hasten the downfall of Joffrey's regime. But it also means we must keep the blockade strong. The city must feel the pressure so the Lannisters can't simply quell uprisings with bribes." Jon nodded, handing back the parchment. "We should inform Catelyn and your father. This changes little in our immediate strategy, but it's valuable to know. If a moment comes when we can coordinate from both inside and out, it might end the war faster." They approached Mace Tyrell's command tent. Inside, they found him in a heated discussion with Tarly about fortifying their perimeter. Margaery waited politely for a break, then presented the letter. Mace read it with parted lips. "Intriguing," he murmured. "I'll not rely on secret conspirators to save us, but if they can free hostages, that might help. If Sansa Stark is indeed in the capital, this could be our chance to rescue her." King Robb would be overjoyed. Lord Tarly, ever pragmatic, remarked, "We can't let illusions of clandestine help weaken our vigilance. But any wedge that undermines the Lannisters from within is welcome. We continue the blockade, keep them starving, let discontent fester. If there's truly a ring of dissidents in the city, they'll thrive on that discontent." Agreement settled over them. The Orchard Alliance, newly aware of possible inside assistance, pressed on with blockading King's Landing, denying the capital shipments of grain and produce. Days piled into weeks, each marked by tension. Scouts brought word of Lannister convoys turned back at the Rose Road or circumventing through the Crownlands at great cost. Whispers from the city spoke of bred riots, of Joffrey's increased cruelty to quell protests. The Tyrell-Stark alliance braced for either the Lannisters to lash out or for some internal collapse to spark in the capital. During that span, Margeary and Jon found fleeting moments of warmth. Bitterbridge's fortress became a second home, where they established modest quarters. They took comfort in the orchard's memory, a reminder of what they fought to preserve. In the evenings, they'd share quiet dinners, discussing the day's developments. Jon would recount the new recruits' progress or the concerns of northern soldiers pining for word from home. Margeary, in turn, described the distribution of resources to peasants, the worry that winter might still come harshly even this far south if war dragged on. Each day tested them, yet each day they clung to hope. One afternoon, as she strolled the battlements, Margeary saw a small party riding in from the east. Banners fluttered in the distance, some neutral device, possibly a messenger. Jon joined her, curiosity etched in his features. They hurried down to meet the arrivals, accompanied by a handful of guards. The riders turned out to be men from the Stormlands, bearing a letter from one of Renly's former bannermen. They sought an audience with Mace Tyrell. Inside the keep's hall, the leader, Ser Harald of House Penrose, explained that Stannis's presence at Dragonstone troubled some Stormland lords. They knew House Tyrell had once nearly pledged to Renly, so they suspected the Tyrells might harbor resentment toward Stannis. Now, with the Orchard Alliance gaining ground, these Stormland lords wondered if they might ally with the Tyrell-Stark cause instead of bending the knee to Stannis. But they demanded assurances that House Tyrell wouldn't force them into subservience or let them be devoured by Lannister reprisals. Margeary and Jon observed from the side while Mace Tyrell and Tarly spoke with Ser Harald. It was clear that the war's shifting lines gave a new chance for old loyalties to be tested. If the Stormlands joined the Orchard Alliance, the Lannisters would face an even larger coalition. But forging that unity required delicate promises. Mace Tyrell, cautious after the fiasco with Renly, probed Ser Harald's sincerity. Tarly insisted that these Stormland lords must accept the Orchard blockade and the leadership of House Tyrell in southern matters. Ser Harald asked what role King Robb had, and whether the Stormlands would be forced to accept the North's independence. It was a swirl of complicated demands and half-formed trust. Margeary stepped forward, using her calm demeanor to soothe tempers. "None here would forcibly subjugate the Stormlands," she assured the visitor. "We ask only for a common stand against Lannister tyranny and a recognition that the Orchard Alliance upholds certain principles: protection of the small folk, equitable sharing of resources once the war ends. The North has no designs on ruling the Stormlands, nor does House Tyrell. We seek an end to this cruel conflict." Ser Harald listened intently, exchanging a look with his companions. He admitted the Stormlands had grown weary of chaos. If House Tyrell and King Robb could offer stable governance, it might persuade them. But Stannis claimed the Iron Throne legally, so some lords hesitated to forsake a potential rightful king. Margeary suppressed a flicker of frustration. The intricacies of feudal loyalties never ceased. Yet she sensed a chance. Many in the Stormlands simply wanted to avoid the bleak fate of those who'd fought for Renly and found themselves cast aside when he died. House Tyrell's renewed strength at Bitterbridge, coupled with the Orchard's symbolic flourish, might provide them the stability they craved. Ultimately, Ser Harald departed with cautious optimism, bearing a draft proposal for Stormland lords to consider. If the Stormlands accepted, they would join the Tyrell-Stark alliance in a defensive pact, promise not to ally with Stannis or the Lannisters, and keep their local autonomy. Margeary felt a glimmer of hope that more houses across the realm might choose alliance over subjugation. The orchard vow, once just a personal bond, had begun to reshape the chessboard of war. Outside, as dusk fell, she and Jon strolled the courtyard. The sky flared in violet and orange, a gentle memory of the orchard's blossoms. Jon admired how the day's negotiations had concluded, but he tempered his praise with caution. If the Stormlands do join, it's another front that Joffrey can't count on, but we must be ready for a sudden shift. War changes alliances in an instant. Margeary pressed her arm into his. We keep watch. At least we no longer stand alone. Perhaps, if the Stormlands tip our way, King's Landing will feel hemmed in from every angle. The orchard blockade remains a thorn in their side. She took a shaky breath. Sometimes I think about how Robert Baratheon, Ned Stark, and my father once navigated the rebellion, forging bonds that shaped the realm for decades. Now we're forging a new shape. If only it didn't cost so many lives. Jon softly agreed, recalling how many had fallen in the battles so far, good men and women snuffed out by the wheels of power. We have to ensure we shape something better. That orchard we long for, a kingdom that isn't forever at war. Maybe that's a dream, but dreams can matter. They continued talking as the final glow faded into night. Margeary's steps felt lighter, imagining a scenario where Lannister tyranny broke and the realm found some measure of peace. She knew the path was littered with pitfalls, yet with Jon at her side, she believed. They parted near the keep's entrance, each to separate duties. She gave his hand a final squeeze, a silent promise that they'd find each other again before sleep, sharing the comfort of unity in these uncertain hours. But the night did not remain serene. A breath before midnight, distant shouting broke the quiet. Margeary, half-dressed for bed, rushed into the corridor. Guards dashed past, lanterns bobbing in the dark. Jon appeared from the opposite end, blade strapped to his waist, hair tousled. They exchanged alarmed glances, then followed the echo of frantic voices toward the eastern battlements. The clamor intensified, steel scraping on stone, urgent cries. Atop the walls, they found a cluster of archers peering into the gloom below. By flickering torchlight, Margeary glimpsed shapes moving beyond the fortress moat. Someone hissed, "Scouts! Saboteurs!" Another soldier muttered that they'd found men crawling through drainage channels, possibly aiming to infiltrate. Jon stepped forward, scanning the rampart. He quickly directed the archers to fan out, ensuring no corner lay unguarded. Ghost crouched near a crenellation, ears pricked, sniffing at the night air. Down below, moonlight revealed shadows scurrying into the reeds that flanked a shallow bend of the moat. The guards loosed a few arrows, but the intruders slipped away, leaving behind a single figure pinned by a shaft to the ground. Soldiers rushed to secure the captive. Jon muttered a terse command for caution. Margeary, heart thudding, watched as they hauled the figure up, ignoring his groans of pain. The flickering lanterns revealed a young man in dark leathers, no obvious sigil, though a faint lion motif on his belt suggested Lannister affiliation. A sergeant hustled the prisoner inside the courtyard. Jon and Margeary descended to question him. Blood smeared the man's leg where an arrow had punctured flesh. He trembled, pain etched into his face. "Who sent you?" Jon demanded, voice low. "We have no desire to kill you if you'll speak." The captive spat. "Better to die than betray my cause. The orchard's days are numbered. You think you can choke King's Landing forever?" Margeary stepped forward. "We choke the Lannisters, not the city's innocent. You're a fool if you believe differently, but we can help that wound if you talk." His eyes flashed hate, but pain weakened his defiance. "We were told to gather intelligence. Maybe sabotage your stores, open the gates for a larger force. But your watch was too sharp." Jon's jaw clenched. Another infiltration attempt just as they feared. "Are more coming? Or was this just a small band?" The prisoner grit his teeth. "Small band, for now, but bigger hunts are planned. You lot can't hold the orchard forever." Margeary signaled for the sergeant to secure the man in a guarded chamber, ensure he was treated so he didn't bleed out. She and Jon exchanged grim looks, realizing that the Lannisters had begun stepping up sabotage. This infiltration might be the first of many. The Orchard blockade strategy was biting the crown deeply. Now King's Landing sought every means to break it. If such covert missions multiplied, the Orchard alliance would be stretched thin trying to defend all corners. The rest of the night passed in sporadic alarms, though no more infiltrators were found. By dawn, Margeary felt frayed, as though the war's fangs sank deeper with each passing day. She found Jon in the courtyard, talking with Catelyn, Tarly, and a group of outriders. They planned new patrol patterns, placing double watch on drainage channels and postern gates. The Orchard blockade would remain, but infiltration attempts might intensify. If sabotage succeeded, it could ruin their supplies or poison wells. War was waged not just in open battles but in shadowy corners. Later that morning, Mace Tyrell called a short gathering. He announced a new directive. Each fortress and supply depot across the Reach would enhance security, coordinate watch rotations, and dispatch roving patrols to catch saboteurs before they infiltrated. Messages would spread to allied houses in the Stormlands, advising them of these tactics. Meanwhile, the Orchard's core farmland near Highgarden would see new perimeter defenses. Lady Olenna's scribes had already begun forming volunteer militias among local peasants to spot suspicious strangers. Margeary and Jon approved. It was a sign the Orchard vow reached deep into the southern populace. People wanted to protect their livelihood from a slow strangulation by cunning foes. Despite the ramped-up vigilance, pockets of normalcy refused to vanish entirely. Even in war, life insisted on continuing. Farmers still coaxed crops from the earth. Cooks in the fortress prepared stew from whatever local produce they had. Courtiers occasionally played music in the evenings, hoping to lift morale. Once, Margeary heard the soft notes of a harp drifting through the hallways and paused, letting the tune wash over her. She found the musician was a traveling bard, half-blind, who had wandered from village to village until seeking refuge with the Tyrell host. She offered him thanks and a small coin. The Orchard might be overshadowed by war, but the human spirit endured in these small acts of grace. Another letter arrived from King Robb, praising them for repelling the infiltration attempts and urging caution. He was making slow gains in the riverlands, capturing minor Lannister outposts, but Tywin's main force stayed elusive, neither risking open battle nor retreating fully. A stalemate loomed. Catelyn read the letter in a subdued tone, her gaze straying to Jon. They both knew that until a decisive stroke fell, the war could drag on for months, even years. In the midst of these concerns, Margeary and Jon carved out a rare afternoon to speak with wounded soldiers. She had insisted on checking the field hospital they'd established in one of Bitterbridge's outer baileys. Rows of cots housed men convalescing from the battle near the Rose Road. The memory of that bloody day still clung to them. Some men, bandaged and pale, managed hopeful smiles upon seeing Margeary, murmuring thanks for her kindness. Others asked Jon about the prospects of returning to the fight. Margeary watched him handle these conversations with quiet compassion, bridging the stoicism of a warrior with the empathy of a man who had tasted fear and grief. At one cot, they found a young soldier named Roland, a farmer's son who had taken up arms not out of love for war but out of duty to House Tyrell. He struggled with a badly injured leg. Margeary knelt, softly asking how the pain was. Roland's eyes flicked to her with gratitude. "Hurts something fierce, my lady, but the maester says I might walk again, if I rest properly." He tried a feeble grin. "I just want to see my mother's orchard once more." Jon placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You will. Focus on healing. Once the orchard is secure for good, you can return to it with your head high." His words rang with sincerity. Margeary felt a surge of warmth. This was the vow in practice, a promise to restore normal life to the orchard's sons and daughters. It wasn't about petty conquests, but about ensuring that Roland and others like him could farm in peace. The days slid into a hazy pattern of vigilance, supply management, and intrigue. Tarly's cavalry scouted the Rose Road at intervals, encountering minimal Lannister presence. The blockade showed results, with caravans rerouted or halted, while the capital's suffering reportedly grew. Margeary heard rumors of bread riots intensifying, and though she disliked the notion of any small folk starving, she knew the Orchard Alliance had little choice. The Lannisters would never capitulate if King's Landing remained comfortable. A part of her dreaded each new dispatch from King's Landing that might speak of brutal repressions. But she forced herself to remain steady. One evening, just as the lamps were lit in the keep's corridor, Lady Olenna arrived at Bitterbridge, escorted by a sturdy guard. The old matriarch insisted on traveling despite the hazards, wishing to consult face-to-face with Mace Tyrell and the Alliance's leaders. When Margeary heard her grandmother had arrived, she rushed to greet her in the fortress courtyard, concerned that such a journey might be too taxing. Olenna shrugged off the worry with a wave of her cane. "I'm old, child, not dead. War doesn't wait for old bones to rest. Where is your father? I must speak with him about these infiltration attempts and the Stormlands overtures." Margeary led her to a smaller hall where Mace, Tarly, Jon, and Catelyn had gathered for an impromptu meeting. Olenna wasted no time, seating herself briskly. "I've come to ensure we're not missing opportunities. The Orchard blockade is crucial, but we should look for a finishing blow. Rumor grows that King's Landing teeters on the brink of chaos. If a well-timed push or internal uprising occurs, we might end the Lannisters' hold. Have you considered pushing a small, elite force near the capital, not to besiege it outright but to coordinate with any rebels within? That letter from a friend in the shadows might be key." Mace Tyrell leaned forward, pondering. "A covert approach? Our numbers would be minimal, but if the city is truly near revolt, a small strike could sow panic among the Crown's men. Yet we risk losing that force if the gates remain in Lannister hands. We have no guarantee the city's walls will open to us." Tarly's face darkened. "Our main strength is the Orchard host. Splitting off an elite unit for infiltration is dicey, but perhaps a handful of cunning knights, guided by knowledge of secret routes, could slip in, link with these dissidents, and do serious damage. If they freed Sansa Stark or others, it might break the Lannisters' morale. We can't rely on chance, though." Jon considered quietly. "I know some hidden paths out of the city from my escape. But infiltration is different from capturing or overthrowing a regime. If we coordinate with these shadows inside, maybe we can free hostages or spark an uprising, forcing the Lannisters to lose control. But I'd not place false hope in a single mission. War rarely folds that neatly." Olenna's eyes glittered. "We keep it in mind. If the stalemate drags on, a bold stroke might end it. The Orchard's people deserve an end, child. War is not a state we can endure forever." At that, Margeary felt gratitude that her grandmother's mind remained as sharp as ever. She looked at Jon, who nodded, both sensing that this infiltration scheme might eventually come to fruition. The rest of the discussion revolved around practicalities. Renewed guard patrols, the possibility of enticing more Stormland lords. Olenna also met with the local stewards who handled supply lines, scolding them for lax records. Margeary watched the older woman's formidable presence, reflecting on how vital she was in keeping House Tyrell from fracturing under stress. If the Orchard vow had roots, Olenna's iron will was part of the fertile soil that nourished them. In the following weeks, news drifted in from various corners. Stannis was said to be building a fleet at Dragonstone. Balon Greyjoy stirred on the Iron Islands, threatening the northern coasts. Tywin hovered near Harrenhal, fighting skirmishes with Robb's forces. The Orchard Alliance maintained the blockade, though some bold smugglers tried to run cargo up lesser rivers. Tarly's cavalry hunted them, capturing or sinking small ships. The Lannisters' anger seethed. Sporadic infiltration attempts continued, though none succeeded as thoroughly as the Orchard's defenders had dreaded. During this relative lull in large-scale hostilities, Margeary and Jon focused on strengthening the Orchard vow's moral core. They arranged small gatherings where Tyrell bannermen and northern representatives shared stories, forging camaraderie beyond mere orders from above. Margeary orchestrated distribution of Orchard produce among the rank and file to remind them why they fought. for the orchard's bountiful future. Jon, for his part, taught northern songs around the campfires, bridging differences of culture. The orchard and the wolf found a synergy that bolstered morale even as the war's grim realities hovered. Then, on a crisp morning that signaled autumn's approach, a raven arrived bearing the seal of House Tully. Catelyn opened it with trembling fingers, recognizing her brother Edmure's handwriting. The letter spoke of a significant clash near the Red Fork, where Robb's forces had finally cornered a segment of Tywin's troops. The North had scored a victory, capturing a Lannister cousin. Tywin himself, enraged, had pulled back further. Meanwhile, word from King's Landing rumored that unrest grew by the day. Bread riots were near constant, and discontent simmered among the gold cloaks, some of whom refused to keep slaughtering starving small folk. Catelyn relayed these tidings, her voice trembling with relief that Robb's fortunes remained positive. She smiled faintly at Jon, who felt a surge of pride for his brother's successes. Margeary placed a gentle hand on Catelyn's arm. It all points to the Lannisters losing their grip. Perhaps soon they'll be forced to negotiate or face total collapse. Olenna, who had remained at Bitterbridge for the time being, squinted at the letter. If Tywin withdraws entirely, Joffrey might be left with only the Kingsguard and whatever gold cloaks remain loyal. That could be the moment to strike. Or perhaps an internal uprising will do the work for us. We must keep watch for signals from that friend in the shadows. A chance might come swiftly. Margaery's heart fluttered. She didn't relish more violence, but if capturing King's Landing ended the war, then it would be a lesser evil. She thought of Sansa Stark, young and vulnerable under Joffrey's tyranny. Freeing her and all the others the crown held hostage was a promise they owed to Eddard Stark's memory. The Orchard Vow demanded not just that the orchard lands be safe, but that cruelty be rooted out from the realm's heart. That same day, as the sun tipped past noon, Margeary and Jon sat beneath a canvas awning near the fortress's interior garden. This small garden served as a miniature echo of Highgarden's orchard, with a handful of fruit trees and a fountain trickling softly. Margeary had chosen this spot to share a rare moment of quiet. She poured watered wine for them both, then took a seat on a wooden bench. Jon, removing his gloves, rubbed his temples. Ghost lay curled at their feet, eyes half closed. Margeary spoke softly, mindful that watchers might lurk. "You've grown thinner," she observed, tracing a finger along his jaw. "All these burdens weigh on you. You carry so many responsibilities for the men, for the Alliance, for memory of your father." He closed his eyes momentarily, exhaling. "I do feel stretched, but so do we all. You have the orchard's future in your hands, and half the realm's eyes on you. I can't imagine that's any lighter." She leaned close, pressing her forehead to his. "Sometimes it frightens me. I never asked to shape kingdoms, but I see no other way. We're bound to this vow, and I believe in it. If we can preserve a better future for these lands, for the North, it will be worth every sleepless night." He gently caught her chin and kissed her, a soft meeting of warmth that defied the war's chill. The fountain's trickle underscored the hush of that hidden moment, as though the orchard's spirit whispered, "Hold fast, hold each other." When they parted, Margeary murmured, "Even if the city soon collapses from within, we must be ready to secure peace, not just conquest. The Orchard Vow means caring for what comes after." Jon nodded. "We'll not repeat the cycle of betrayal and backstabbing. If the Lannisters fall, we must show we stand for something better, a realm that doesn't devour itself. I imagine Ned Stark would say the same. And your grandmother, no matter her sharp tongue, also sees beyond mere power." They lingered in that oasis, the sunlight filtering through leaves overhead. For a time, they let themselves dream of a realm where orchard blossoms could bloom every spring without fear of war's ravages. Then, summoned by the responsibilities they could not escape, they rose. Duty awaited. The Orchard Vow might guide them, but it demanded tireless vigilance. That twilight, as they finished another round of meeting with quartermasters, a hush swept the fortress. A raven arrived bearing the Tyrell seal, but from an unusual location, a small holdfast near the Mander's lower course. The letter was short, penned hastily. To Lord Tyrell, Lady Margeary, and allies, we have intercepted an urgent whisper from King's Landing. A group within the city claims that if the orchard blockade continues just a bit longer, riots will reach a breaking point. They beg us to stand ready for a swift thrust to the capital. They will attempt to open a gate from inside when the moment comes. They say Joffrey's men can't hold the city if the people erupt. This message is uncertain, but we pass it on. If it's a trap, caution is advised. If genuine, we may see the Lannisters undone from within. Ser Alistair Flowers, scouting near the Mander. Margeary's pulse quickened. This echoed the letter from a friend in the shadows, suggesting an internal uprising in King's Landing. Could the Orchard vow find its culmination in a decisive push on the capital, timed with the city's own revolt? Lord Tarly and Mace Tyrell both eyed the letter warily. Jon felt the tug of possibility. Redeeming Ned's memory by toppling the Lannisters from within sounded like the swiftest route to end the war. Yet everyone recognized the risk. If it was a trap, marching on King's Landing might lead them into a lethal ambush. Catelyn suggested sending swift riders to Robb so he could coordinate. If he advanced from the Riverlands at the same moment the Orchard Alliance pressed from the south, and the dissidents inside the city rose up, the Lannisters would be caught in a triple pincer. Lord Tarly remained skeptical but acknowledged that waiting forever had its own perils. Mace Tyrell, torn between caution and ambition, glanced at Margeary and Jon for their input. They conferred. The Orchard vow was not about recklessness, but if this inside help was genuine, it could save countless lives by ending the war abruptly. Finally, a consensus emerged. Prepare an army to move within days, but wait for clearer confirmation. Scouts would push closer to King's Landing, carrying hidden signals to the dissidents. If a sign appeared that the city was on the brink, they would march. If not, they'd hold. Mace Tyrell placed Jon and Tarly in charge of mustering a strike force near the Rose Road, large enough to break through Joffrey's final lines but not so large as to leave the orchard unguarded. Margeary would remain behind or follow at a safe distance to manage supply lines, while Catelyn advised and carried messages from Robb. Soon, the Orchard Alliance crackled with fresh tension. Men sharpened swords, horses were readied, wagons prepared to move. Everyone sensed a turning point. If the city truly erupted, the Orchard vow might see final victory, or they might ride into a cunning Lannister snare. Margeary felt her heart pound each time she locked eyes with Jon, wondering if the next farewell might be the last. But though fear threatened, she steeled herself with resolve. The Orchard vow was meant for these exact crossroads. Time crawled, days blurred under frantic preparations. Then, near the week's end, another letter arrived, this one from an informant traveling with the Orchard Alliance's scouts. It reported that King's Landing was indeed boiling over with unrest. Bread riots, open defiance of gold cloaks, rumors that half the city's gates were undermanned. The letter stated that if the Orchard Alliance advanced swiftly, the conspirators inside would attempt to open a gate by night, letting them in. The letter used a code phrase matching the earlier message. The Orchard's bloom is nigh. That same evening, Mace Tyrell summoned a final war council in Bitterbridge's Great Hall. Torches flickered on stone walls, painting the gathered faces in dancing shadows. Margeary, Jon, Catelyn, Tarly, Olenna, and other key lords listened as Mace read the letter. The hush was absolute when he finished. Olenna tapped her cane. "This is the moment, dear boy. Unless we're content to let the city fester further, now is the time to strike." Tarly exhaled. "We risk riding into a city of chaos, but that chaos might be our ally. If we time it well, the Orchard Alliance enters while the Lannisters scramble. We must coordinate with King Robb, ensuring Tywin doesn't fall upon us from behind." Catelyn held up a fresh dispatch from the north. "Robb just pinned Tywin near Harrenhal again, enough that Tywin's movement would be slow. If Tywin tries to rush back to King's Landing, Robb can pursue. This might truly be our opening." Jon's pulse hammered. "If we do this, we must move quickly in disciplined ranks. The Orchard vow stands for liberation, not a massacre. We should instruct our men to minimize harm to civilians. We come to free them from Joffrey's cruelty, not pillage the capital. Margeary lifted her chin. I agree. We must keep order. The Orchard Vow is meaningless if we replace one terror with another. Let it be known that we march to break the Lannisters' hold and restore peace. If the gates open from within, we secure them, free hostages, and stabilize the city. Mace Tyrell looked at each of them in turn. Then we ride. The Orchard Alliance will gather a core force here. Lord Tarly leads the cavalry, Jon at his side. I'll lead the main infantry with Lady Margeary assisting. Catelyn, will you join us or remain to coordinate messages? Catelyn answered calmly. I will ride with you. If Sansa or Arya is inside that city, I want to see them freed. Olenna, with a faint smirk, said, I'll remain at Bitterbridge to manage the Orchard lands and keep watch for betrayal. I'm too old for the final charge, child, but you have my blessings. Thus, they finalized the plan. At dawn, the Orchard Alliance would march for King's Landing, relying on their hidden friends to open a gate. If it succeeded, they might take the city with minimal bloodshed. If it failed, they faced a brutal siege or a trap. But war's dice were thrown. Margeary and Jon clasped hands briefly before the council parted. Their vow led here to the capital's gates, the seat of the Lannisters' power. One more roll of fate might decide everything. Morning broke with banners rustling in a brisk wind. War drums sounded a low cadence. Squads of spearmen, archers, and cavalry mustered in the courtyard, morale heightened by the promise of decisive action. The Orchard Vow's symbol, rose twined with wolf, fluttered beside the Tyrell and Stark sigils. Margeary felt each drumbeat reverberate in her chest. She mounted her mare, Evening Star, while Jon readied his gelding. Ghost bounded at their side. Catelyn and Tarly joined Mace Tyrell at the front, receiving salutes from lines of men. A hush of anticipation hung over them all. Margeary caught Jon's gaze amid the swirl of activity. No words were needed. They had come so far, tested by fire and steel. Now they rode to the heart of the realm. If the Orchard Vow triumphed, the land might finally see an end to Joffrey's monstrous reign. The Orchard blockade had starved the city, rousing the small folk against the crown. Allies in the shadows would fling open the gates. It sounded like a dream or a cunning play, but the Orchard Vow had taught them that even improbable hopes could flower if nurtured by steadfast hearts. At Mace Tyrell's shouted command, the Orchard Alliance marched. Hooves clattered on stone. Infantry boots pounded the ground. Wagons rattled with supplies. They left Bitterbridge behind, forging east along the Rose Road. Scouts ranged ahead, scanning for Lannister ambushes. The sun climbed higher, bathing them in autumn's golden glow. Hours passed in a steady rhythm, the men's spirits bolstered by the sense that they advanced not merely to fight but to liberate. Margeary and Jon rode near each other, exchanging quiet words about the orchard lands left behind, how Lady Olenna would keep them safe. The Orchard Vow was in good hands. 3 days of travel brought them within sight of the Crownlands. The Rose Road unfurled toward the distant walls of King's Landing. Smoke rose from the city in thin plumes, a testament to the restless riots within. Tarly's outriders returned with news that the outer farmland lay under poor guard. Only a few gold cloaks patrolled, and they scattered at the approach of a large host. Mace Tyrell ordered the men to advance carefully, camping out of immediate sight of the walls, waiting for nightfall. The plan hinged on stealth and cunning. At dusk, their hidden allies would signal whether the gate could be opened. If so, the Orchard Alliance would sweep in. Tension built like a thunderhead. Men whispered that they might be storming the capital by the next dawn. Some prayed for a quick victory, others feared a trap. Margeary worked tirelessly to keep them calm, reminding them that they fought to free the city's oppressed, not to raise it. She joined Jon in reviewing final instructions for each unit: archers to hold the perimeter, cavalry to exploit an open gate. The Orchard Vow shaped every order, emphasizing discipline, protection of civilians, no looting or torment. They would not become the monsters they opposed. Night fell with a waning moon. The Orchard Alliance's camp lay among rolling hills, a mile from the city walls. Torches were carefully shielded. The men spoke in hushed tones, nerves on edge. Jon and Margaery stood with Mace Tyrell, Tarly, and Catelyn near a vantage point. Through a spyglass, Tarly observed the city's gates. At the designated hour, they expected a signal, perhaps a lantern flash or some coded flicker. Each passing minute dragged in taut silence. Margaery's heart raced. Was this the pivot of the entire war? Suddenly, Tarly stiffened. There! A flash at the southern gate tower. Twice, then once. Mace Tyrell peered through the spyglass, confirming the pattern. The Orchard Alliance's inside allies had presumably taken control of that gate. Cheers rose among the watchers, stifled quickly so as not to betray themselves. Mace turned to Catelyn, who nodded. "We move now," she said. "We can't give them time to lose that gate. Forward quietly, then rush if we must." The Orchard Alliance roused in near silence. Cavalry readied, infantry assembled. Ghost prowled at Jon's side, a silent sentinel. Margaery felt her pulse thunder. She prayed no betrayal lay in wait. Within the hour, their columns approached the city's southern gate. Dim torchlight on the walls revealed shockingly few defenders. An abrupt shout rose from somewhere above, answered by the Orchard Alliance's clarion call. Then, as though the city had turned on itself, the gate creaked open from inside. For a heartbeat, the Orchard host hesitated, disbelieving. Then Tarly roared, "Advance! Secure the gate!" Horsemen surged forward, Margaery and Jon among them. The gate swung wide, revealing a cluster of ragged figures wearing improvised armor, beckoning them in. The Orchard Alliance poured through. No hail of arrows rained down, only pockets of gold cloaks who rushed to respond. But the infiltration had come too swiftly. Margaery glimpsed city dwellers in tattered clothes cheering the Orchard host, cursing Joffrey's name. The Orchard Vow's promise had found an echo here, in King's Landing's own angry hearts. Once inside, the chaos heightened. Streets twisted in gloom, with small folk surging out to watch or join the cause. Some gold cloaks flailed in disorganized resistance. Tarly's cavalry pressed them aside, aiming to reach the main thoroughfares. Mace Tyrell, directing infantry, called for discipline. Catelyn, on horseback, urged them to find the Red Keep. The Orchard Vow had no desire to let the city descend into anarchy, but their priority was to depose Joffrey and free any Stark hostages. Alongside them, men wearing no obvious sigil guided them, presumably the conspirators from the shadows, leading them around blockades. Jon's sword was drawn, though he dreaded using it on city defenders who might simply be following orders. Margaery rode at his flank, eyes scanning for danger. Ghost ranged ahead, startling the few gold cloaks who tried to rally. Cries of "Death to the false king" echoed from alleyways. Flames flickered from some distant structure, riot or sabotage. The Orchard Vow advanced, funneling more men through the opened gate as the southern part of King's Landing fell under their control with astonishing speed. Near the Street of Flower, a band of gold cloaks attempted to form a shield wall, shouting that the Orchard traders must be driven out. Tarly's cavalry hammered the line from the flank. Margaery winced at the clash, but the Orchard Vow's momentum proved unstoppable. The gold cloaks broke, scattering. Small folk emerged, pelting them with stones. Freed of fear, the populace turned on their former oppressors. Margaery trembled at the raw fury unleashed. She prayed the Orchard Vow's instructions about protecting civilians would hold. War in city streets could become a bloodbath if not contained. Catelyn guided Margaery and Jon forward. "We must secure the Red Keep quickly, or else the city might dissolve into chaos," she urged, spurring her horse. A handful of Orchard Knights followed, forging a path through narrow streets. Rebels cheered them on. A swirl of burning debris choked one intersection, forcing them to backtrack. Margaery coughed in the smoke. Jon shielded her with his arm, guiding them around an alley. Each turn brought glimpses of turmoil. A looted guard post, a building ablaze, small folk chanting for the Orchard's victory. Then, in the near distance, rose the Red Keep's outer walls, lit by torches and the glow of scattered fires. Soldiers in Lannister livery were massed at the main gate. Atop the battlements, crossbowmen aimed into the dark. The Orchard Vow faced a final stand. Tarly and Mace Tyrell arrived with fresh reinforcements, forming ranks along the wide courtyard before the gate. The Lannisters had not crumbled entirely. Margeary spotted the flicker of gold among them. Kingsguard, perhaps, loyal to Joffrey. This might be the war's apex. Orchard Alliance facing the last citadel of Lannister power, the once unassailable seat of the Iron Throne. Tarly bellowed for the Orchard host to form up, shields interlocking. Arrows and quarrels hissed from the walls. Screams rose as Orchard men fell. Mace Tyrell commanded the archers to return fire. Jon, sword ready, searched for a path. If only they could breach the gate or scale the walls from inside, they'd corner Joffrey. But the Red Keep had always been formidable. The Orchard Vow's conspirators had not seized this stronghold. They'd run out of help within. This would be a brutal push. Suddenly, a horn blast from the city behind them signaled that more Orchard men had arrived. The watchers on the ramparts faltered at the sudden wave of fresh forces surging around the corners. Margeary spurred her horse to the side, scanning for an opening. She glimpsed a postern door at the far end of the curtain wall, seemingly less guarded. "Jon!" she called, pointing. He nodded, eyes narrowing. If they could slip a squad there, they might flank the defenders at the main gate. Catelyn overheard and signaled Tarly. He dispatched a contingent of Orchard Knights to follow Jon. Margeary insisted on accompanying them, despite Jon's worried glance. "You'll need me," she said firmly. "I'm done standing at a distance." Reluctant, Jon yielded. They led a group through winding side paths, forging across rubble-strewn courtyards. Crossbow bolts whizzed overhead, but the Orchard squad pressed on. Ghost bounded ahead, sniffing at shadows, occasionally letting out a low growl that warned them of lurking Lannister men. They found the postern gate locked from within. A pair of guards in Lannister colors barred the way, startled by the Orchard Knights' sudden arrival. In a flurry of steel, Jon and the Orchard men overpowered them, though one Orchard Knight took a spear to the shoulder. Margeary, breath-catching, assisted in dragging the wounded knight aside. With a battered iron key from one guard's belt, Jon unlocked the postern. The hinges squealed. Beyond lay a narrow passage leading into the Red Keep's outer yard. The Orchard squad advanced cautiously, torches flickering. Shouts echoed from overhead battlements, where Orchard archers now dueled with crossbowmen. Margeary held her breath, adrenaline spiking. This was the final stronghold of the Lannisters' rule. If they could open the keep from inside, Tarly's main force could flood in. At the corridor's end, a heavy wooden door blocked their path, presumably leading deeper into the fortress. They heard the clang of metal from beyond, defenders scrambling to hold this access. Jon hefted his sword, glancing at Margeary with fierce determination. Together, they pushed forward, Orchard Knights at their back. The door burst open as Lannister soldiers rushed in, swords raised. The clash was brutal in the confined space. Margeary stayed near the rear, heart pounding as Orchard men locked blades with the defenders. Blood spattered the walls. Jon engaged a tall sergeant in gold-trimmed mail, their swords ringing. Ghost lunged, snapping at ankles. The Orchard Vow demanded they kill only out of necessity, but this battle left no room for mercy. The Lannisters fought with the desperation of cornered wolves. Finally, the Orchard Knights prevailed, forcing the Lannisters back or cutting them down. With the corridor cleared, they pressed on. Margeary tasted copper in the air, tried not to retch at the sight of fallen men. She reminded herself that each step might save countless lives if it ended Joffrey's tyranny. They emerged into a larger courtyard, part of the Red Keep's inner ward. Shouts of alarm rang. She glimpsed more gold cloaks rallying near a door that presumably led to the throne room. Could Joffrey himself be inside, cowering, or brandishing that cruel crossbow? Jon motioned Orchard Knights to fan out. If they could hold this courtyard, Tarly's main force could push from the outer gate. Margeary saw a battered portcullis mechanism in the wall. If triggered from within, it might open the Red Keep's main gate. She called out to a knight who understood siege machinery. He rushed to the mechanism, fiddling with gears. The orchard vow had the advantage of surprise. Another wave of orchard men poured through the postern behind them, reinforcing the courtyard. Gradually, the defenders realized they were surrounded on two sides. Orchard squads inside and Tarly's men pounding at the main gate outside. A thunderous crash echoed as orchard forces battered the main gate from without. Simultaneously, the orchard knight at the portcullis lever managed to shift the gears. With a groan of chains, the main gate parted. A roar of orchard men flooded the courtyard, led by Tarly, Mace Tyrell, and Catelyn. The Lannisters in the yard reeled under the combined assault. Panic seized them. Some tossed down arms, crying for mercy. Others fought to the death. The orchard vow advanced methodically, subduing or slaying the last pockets of resistance. In the chaos, Margeary spotted a tall, blonde Kingsguard knight sprinting away through an arch, presumably to guard Joffrey or rally survivors. Jon locked eyes with her. They nodded as one. They had to see this through, find Joffrey or whomever commanded, and end the conflict. Racing after the fleeing knight, they wove through corridors draped with Lannister banners. A few orchard men followed, but the winding halls soon parted them. Margaery's breath rasped in her throat. She prayed they wouldn't stumble into a trap. Ahead, the corridor widened into a grand hallway. Torchlight flickered upon marble pillars. Stained glass windows depicted Targaryen dragons, remnants of an older era. At the far end, a set of ornate doors, likely the throne room. The blonde Kingsguard stood before it, sword drawn, flanked by two more. One orchard knight at Margaery's side muttered in awe at the formidable sight. The Kingsguard wore shining plate, each ready to defend their liege to the last. Jon tightened his grip on his sword, stepping forward. "Stand aside," he said, voice echoing. "We have the city. Joffrey's tyranny ends now." The lead Kingsguard scoffed. "You come to murder a child king? No, we defend the throne. You orchard traitors have no right here." Margeary met the man's cold gaze. "We come to free the realm from a false king who executed Ned Stark unjustly, who starves his own people, who murders for sport. Surrender. Save your lives." He spat. "I swore an oath. I'll not yield to traitors." Then the Kingsguard attacked with furious speed. The orchard knight at Margaery's side moved to block, but a swift slash cut him down. Margeary gasped. Jon sprang into action, clashing blade against the lead knights. The hallway resounded with steel. Another Kingsguard lunged at Margeary, but she dodged aside, her training and reflexes sharpened by war. She carried a dagger, but facing a fully armed Kingsguard was daunting. She backed up, hoping to keep him at bay. Ghost leapt, snapping at the knight's arm, forcing him to pivot. Jon fought with measured ferocity, remembering the orchard vow's purpose. He found an opening in the lead knight's defense, driving his sword beneath the arm joint. The Kingsguard gasped, eyes wide. Blood stained the polished white plate. He collapsed, sword clattering. Meanwhile, Ghost's intervention let Margaery's orchard knight land a strike on the second foe, though the orchard knight was wounded. The third Kingsguard pressed the attack, cornering Jon. Yet Jon sidestepped, parrying a downward slash. In a final thrust, he struck the knight's exposed visor slit, a blow that ended the fight. The hall fell silent except for ragged breathing. Heart-pounding, Margeary rushed to Jon's side. He stood unsteady, shoulders heaving from the battle, sword reddened. She touched his arm gently, relieved he still lived. The orchard vow demanded they not glory in bloodshed, but it had been kill or be killed. They turned to the ornate doors. No other defenders emerged. Carefully, they pushed the doors open. Beyond them lay the throne room, cavernous and silent. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, made of twisted swords, a grim symbol of power. And there, near the base of the dais, crouched Joffrey Baratheon. He wore a crown askew, face pale, clutching a crossbow with trembling hands. Two gold cloaks stood behind him, uncertain whether to flee or fight. Joffrey snarled, voice cracking, You dare invade my city? I am your king." Margeary stepped forward, dagger in hand. "No, Joffrey. You lost the city the moment you starved and brutalized its people. The Orchard Alliance enters to free them from your cruelty." Joffrey's eyes blazed with fear and fury. "The Orchard? Stark's bastard whore? I'll kill you all." He raised the crossbow, arrow aimed wildly. But Jon, with reflexes honed by countless battles, lunged, sword flicking. The crossbow bolt went wide, thudding into a pillar. Joffrey stumbled, screaming as the tip of Jon's blade grazed his arm. The gold cloaks behind him dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Joffrey shrank back, tears streaking his face. Margeary felt an odd pang. For all his cruelty, Joffrey was just a twisted boy taught to revel in power. She steadied her voice. "Where is Sansa Stark? Where are the others you hold captive?" Joffrey whimpered, blood trickling from his arm. "Gone. Sansa's locked in a tower, so she won't escape." "Aye!" A sudden clang behind them announced Orchard Knights pouring into the throne room. Tarly among them. Margeary and Jon stepped aside, letting Tarly seize Joffrey's arms, wrenching him upright. The boy king screeched, calling them traitors, flailing. Tarly pinned him with practiced efficiency. The Orchard vow had succeeded. The city was theirs, the Lannister king dethroned. Margeary exhaled a tremulous breath, relief mingling with heartbreak at the carnage outside. As Orchard Knights secured Joffrey, Margeary and Jon hurried to find the tower where Sansa might be. A gold cloak, cowed by fear, guided them. With a small group of Orchard men, they ascended winding stairs. At the top, they found a locked chamber. A single guard stood watch, but seeing Orchard arms, he surrendered. Inside the room, they discovered Sansa Stark, wan and trembling but alive. She shrank back at first, unsure if new tormentors had come. But when she recognized Jon, a flood of tears overcame her. Jon rushed forward, calling her name, arms open. Sansa collapsed into his embrace, sobbing. Margeary watched, eyes misty, recalling how Sansa's fate had weighed on them all. Sansa murmured, voice raw, "Is this real? Are you truly here, Jon? How did you?" He shushed her gently, smoothing her matted hair. "We came with the Orchard Alliance, Sansa. You're free now. The Lannisters. We have Joffrey in custody. The city is ours." A sob of relief, a second wave of tears. Margeary stepped forward, placing a hand on Sansa's shoulder, saying softly, "We've long waited to rescue you. King Robb and your mother rejoice. The Orchard vow guided us here." Sansa barely managed a nod, still trembling from the shock. Margeary's heart broke for this girl who had endured so much cruelty. She resolved that no one would ever harm Sansa again. They guided her downstairs, Orchard Knights clearing the way. In the throne room, Joffrey still ranted under guard, while Orchard men removed Lannister banners. Tarly demanded the gold cloaks lay down arms. The Red Keep belonged to the Orchard Alliance. Margeary saw tears shine in Catelyn's eyes as she beheld Sansa safe at last. A hush fell. War had not ended, but the seat of Lannister power had fallen. Outside, the city roiled, some celebrating, others fearful. But the Orchard vow had entered the capital triumphant. Jon wrapped an arm around Margeary's waist. "We did it," he whispered, voice thick with exhaustion. She nodded, tears glimmering. The Orchard vow, forged in Winterfell's Godswood and reaffirmed in Highgarden, now carried them to the halls of the Iron Throne. A future free of Lannister tyranny beckoned. The Orchard lands, the North, perhaps the entire realm, might at last know a dawn without the shadow of war. Though challenges lay ahead, restoring order, negotiating new governance, ensuring Tywin didn't counterattack. This moment stood as a testament to unity. The Orchard vow had withstood every trial, culminating here in the capital's heart. In the Red Keep's courtyard, dawn brightened. Margeary and Jon stood among Orchard banners, the city's battered small folk peering from windows. Freed gold cloaks cautiously joined them, uncertain but docile. As the sun's first rays touched the Orchard symbol, Margeary's gaze traveled to Jon. She recalled the orchard flowers at Highgarden, the northern snows he described, the vow they'd shared so long ago in quiet corridors. "We hold to that vow," she murmured. "For all that's come before, and all that must be rebuilt, the orchard stands." Jon pressed his forehead to hers. "Yes, and we stand with it. Always." Their clasped hands reminded them that they would face the realm's next challenges. Together, King's Landing might need healing, Tywin might yet try a counterstrike, and the Orchard Vow's ideals would be tested once more. But in that dawn, they tasted the promise of a realm not forever at war. A realm where orchard blossoms might bloom each spring, where a wolf and a rose could guide men from cruelty's darkness into a gentler sunlit path. And so, side by side, they stepped forward, forging a new day in the heart of the realm, certain that no matter the storms to come, their vow would endure.